They believed they were humiliating nothing more than a maid. But before the night was over, they had unknowingly revealed the true measure of their own character. The Romano estate shimmered beneath thousands of crystal lights, its grand ballroom overflowing with New York's wealthiest business leaders, politicians, philanthropists, and social elites, all gathered to celebrate the engagement of Dominic Romano and Vanessa Sinclair. Every polished marble floor reflected the golden glow of towering chandeliers, while a string quartet filled the air with elegant melodies that drifted through conversations about success, influence, and legacy. Every guest admired the breathtaking decorations, the flawless service, and the perfect image carefully crafted for the evening. Hidden behind that perfection, however, were dozens of staff members working tirelessly to ensure every detail unfolded without interruption. Among them moved Alicia Brooks, a young Black maid whose quiet professionalism had earned the respect of nearly everyone who worked inside the Romano estate. At 28 years old, Alicia carried herself with calm dignity that no designer dress could imitate. Her beautiful natural curls framed a warm smile that never seemed forced, even after long hours spent serving people who rarely noticed her existence. While many guests judged others by expensive jewelry or famous last names, Alicia greeted every person with exactly the same gentle kindness. Whether they were billionaires entering through the front doors or kitchen employees carrying heavy trays through service hallways. Most people never realized she remembered everyone's name. She remembered birthdays, favorite desserts, dietary restrictions, and even which elderly guests preferred chairs with extra cushions because of aching knees. To Alicia, caring for people had never been part of a job description. It was simply who she chose to be. Across the ballroom, Dominic Romano stood surrounded by influential guests offering congratulations and business proposals in equal measure. Dressed in an impeccably tailored black tuxedo, the respected Mafia Boss spoke little, listening far more than he talked. His composed expression rarely revealed emotion, yet nothing escaped his attention. Years of leadership had taught him that the loudest people seldom carried the greatest strength. Standing proudly beside him was Vanessa Sinclair, whose dazzling designer gown and flawless appearance attracted endless admiration from photographers and socialites throughout the evening. She accepted every compliment with practiced elegance, determined that nothing would distract from what she believed should be the most important night of her life. As servers quietly refreshed crystal glasses throughout the ballroom, Alicia approached the head table carrying a silver tray filled with sparkling water for several distinguished guests. She moved carefully through the crowd, gracefully avoiding conversations and camera flashes while remaining almost invisible, exactly as professional staff were expected to do. Just as she reached Vanessa's chair, an unexpected guest stepped backward while greeting another executive, gently brushing Alicia's shoulder. The tray shifted ever so slightly. A few drops of sparkling water landed upon the lower edge of Vanessa's expensive white gown. The room seemed to stop breathing. Alicia immediately placed the tray safely on a nearby table before speaking with genuine sincerity. "I am deeply sorry, Miss Sinclair. It was an accident. Please allow me to help." Several nearby guests looked away awkwardly, expecting nothing more than an apology and a quick solution. Instead, Vanessa slowly looked down at the tiny water spots before lifting her eyes toward Alicia with a smile that held no warmth. Without saying a word, she reached toward a decorative table where a pair of ceremonial ribbon-cutting scissors rested after the evening's earlier celebration. Before anyone fully understood what she intended, Vanessa stepped closer, grasped a section of Alicia's long curls, and cut away a large portion in front of the silent ballroom. Soft strands drifted onto the polished marble floor like dark ribbons caught by invisible wind. No one moved. No one spoke. Alicia instinctively raised one trembling hand toward her uneven hair, not out of anger, but quiet disbelief. She lowered her eyes, took one slow breath, and remained perfectly composed despite the humiliation surrounding her. Across the ballroom, Dominic had witnessed every second. His expression did not change, but the conversation around him disappeared into complete silence as his eyes rested not on the ruined hairstyle, but on the extraordinary dignity of the young woman who refused to let cruelty decide who she would become. The music continued playing, but no one inside the Romano ballroom truly heard another note. Crystal glasses remained suspended halfway towards silent conversations as hundreds of guests stared at the young maid standing motionless beneath the golden chandeliers. Tiny curls of dark hair rested upon the polished marble floor like forgotten memories, while Alicia Brooks slowly lowered her hand from the uneven edges of her hair and drew one steady breath. She neither argued nor cried. Instead, she looked respectfully toward Vanessa Sinclair and spoke so softly that the silence itself seemed to carry her words across the room. "I am sorry your evening was disturbed, Miss Sinclair." The unexpected response left several guests visibly uncomfortable. They had anticipated pleading, anger, or public embarrassment. Instead, they witnessed remarkable self-control from the one person who had every reason to lose it. Vanessa merely adjusted the sleeve of her designer gown before turning back toward her guests as though nothing significant had happened. A few polite laughs followed from those eager to remain in her favor, but they faded almost immediately because no one else joined them. Across the ballroom, Dominic Romano remained where he stood, quietly watching Alicia rather than the woman standing beside him. His expression revealed nothing, yet his eyes followed every movement as Alicia calmly bent down and began collecting the strands of her own hair from the floor with careful hands. One elderly guest started to help, but Alicia gently smiled and thanked her before continuing alone. Within minutes, she excused herself from the ballroom without drawing further attention, disappearing through the service hallway while the celebration awkwardly struggled to continue. Behind the swinging kitchen doors, the atmosphere changed completely. Chefs stopped preparing desserts. Servers stood frozen beside silver trays. Housekeepers looked toward Alicia with quiet heartbreak, unsure what words could possibly comfort someone whose dignity had just been challenged before an entire ballroom. Alicia offered each of them the same reassuring smile she always did. "Please do not worry about me," she said gently. The guests should still enjoy their evening. Without waiting for sympathy, she retrieved a broom, a dustpan, and fresh cleaning cloths before returning alone to the now nearly empty ballroom. Most guests had moved toward the garden terrace for fireworks, leaving only scattered glasses, folded napkins, and the lingering weight of what everyone had witnessed. Alicia carefully swept the marble floor until she found every remaining strand of her hair. Instead of throwing it away, she quietly placed each curl inside a small brown paper envelope she found in the housekeeping cabinet. She folded the top with surprising care, slipped it into the pocket of her apron, and continued cleaning as though completing another ordinary task. No one noticed the envelope except Dominic, who happened to pass the open ballroom doors while speaking with his estate manager. He paused for only a moment. From a distance, he watched Alicia kneel beside the polished floor, gently brushing away the final loose strands before standing and straightening every chair that had shifted during the celebration. There was no resentment on her face, only quiet determination to finish her responsibilities with the same care she had shown before the evening changed forever. Dominic continued walking without saying a word, but for the first time that night the engagement celebration no longer seemed important to him. Long after the final limousine departed and the chandeliers slowly dimmed, the grand estate stood wrapped in silence. Alicia carried the small paper envelope back to the modest staff quarters, placed it carefully inside her locker beside a faded family photograph, and closed the door with trembling fingers. Outside, the last lights of the celebration faded into the darkness, but inside that simple metal locker rested something far more valuable than cut hair. It held a dream that no one in the ballroom had yet realized had been taken from her. The following morning, the Romano estate awakened beneath a quiet blanket of autumn sunlight, but the warmth outside never reached the hearts of those who had witnessed the previous evening. Housekeepers spoke in softer voices than usual, gardeners exchanged uneasy glances across the courtyard, and the kitchen staff worked in near silence while preparing breakfast for the estate's residents. Everyone remembered what had happened inside the ballroom. No one knew how to erase the memory. Alicia Brooks arrived before sunrise exactly as she did every morning, wearing a freshly pressed black housekeeping uniform and a neatly folded headscarf that gently covered the uneven edges of her shortened curls. She greeted every employee with the same kind smile she had offered for years, never allowing the sadness in her heart to change the warmth in her voice. The older cook embraced her gently before handing her a cup of hot tea. Alicia accepted it with gratitude and quietly thanked her before beginning another day of work as though nothing unusual had happened. Throughout the morning, she polished silver trays, arranged fresh flowers throughout the mansion, and carefully prepared guest rooms for several visitors expected later that week. She completed every responsibility with remarkable attention to detail, never rushing, never complaining, and never mentioning the painful humiliation that still lingered in everyone's thoughts. The staff found her quiet strength almost impossible to understand. During a short break, two younger housekeepers sat together folding clean linens while speaking in hushed voices. "I still cannot believe she came back," one whispered. The other slowly nodded. "She always comes back. Alicia has never allowed difficult days to change who she is." Nearby, the estate's elderly groundskeeper smiled gently as he overheard the conversation. "You have only worked here 3 years," he said. "I have watched Miss Brooks for nearly 7. She has helped every person in this house at one time or another." He quietly explained how Alicia regularly stayed after her shift to help the night staff prepare banquet rooms without requesting overtime. He remembered the winter when one of the kitchen assistants lost his apartment after a building fire, and Alicia quietly organized clothing, meals, and temporary housing before anyone else even learned what had happened. Another employee recalled that Alicia often spent her only free afternoon each week visiting her grandmother at a nursing home across the city before returning to volunteer at a neighborhood food pantry. She never spoke about those moments because she believed kindness should remain private whenever possible. While these conversations quietly spread through the estate, Alicia continued her work, completely unaware that the people around her had begun seeing her with even greater admiration than before. She stopped to comfort a frightened new employee who worried about making mistakes, patiently showing her how to arrange the formal dining table without the slightest hint of impatience. Later, she carried a tray of fresh pastries to the security team stationed at the front gate, thanking them for working long hours in the chilly morning air. Every small gesture reflected the same quiet generosity she had always shown, long before anyone noticed her. From the second-floor library, Dominic Romano happened to observe several of those moments through the tall windows overlooking the courtyard. He watched employees naturally gathering around Alicia, not because she demanded attention, but because her calm presence seemed to bring peace wherever she walked. He realized something that no financial report, business negotiation, or public celebration had ever taught him. Respect could never be purchased through influence or inherited through power. It was earned quietly, one act of kindness at a time. As Alicia disappeared down the hallway carrying fresh linens toward the guest rooms, Dominic remained standing beside the window, unable to ignore the growing question that had followed him since the engagement celebration. Who was the young woman everyone else had overlooked? For so many years, and what dream had she protected so carefully inside that small brown envelope? The days that followed settled into a quiet rhythm, yet Dominic Romano found himself noticing details he had overlooked for years. Every morning before the estate fully awakened, Alicia Brooks was already moving through the long marble hallways carrying fresh flowers gathered from the gardens, replacing faded arrangements with simple elegance that brightened every room without demanding attention. She greeted every employee by name, remembered who preferred coffee without sugar, and paused whenever an elderly member of the household staff needed help carrying supplies. Nothing about her routine suggested she was trying to impress anyone. She simply lived each day according to the same quiet values she had always carried. Dominic began leaving his office more often, telling himself he was inspecting the estate, though he slowly realized he was observing something far more important than polished floors or carefully maintained rooms. He watched Alicia patiently teach a nervous new maid how to fold linen napkins without making her feel embarrassed for asking questions. He saw her kneel beside the estate gardener to help gather scattered flower bulbs after a sudden gust of wind overturned a basket. Later that afternoon, she noticed one of the chauffeurs sitting alone during his lunch break, looking worried after receiving a difficult phone call. Without asking unnecessary questions, she quietly left half of her homemade lunch on the bench beside him with a handwritten note that simply read, "Tomorrow can always become better." She walked away before he even realized who had left it there. Dominic remained standing several yards away beneath the shade of an old oak tree, watching the entire exchange without interrupting. For the first time in many years, he found himself comparing two very different kinds of strength. Vanessa demanded admiration wherever she entered. Alicia inspired respect without ever seeking it. That difference lingered in his thoughts throughout every business meeting and every evening conversation. Meanwhile, Vanessa behaved as though the engagement celebration had unfolded exactly as she intended. She dismissed the uncomfortable silence that had followed her actions as nothing more than guests being overly sensitive. During afternoon tea, she casually remarked that household employees should remember their place if they wished to avoid embarrassing situations. Several members of the staff lowered their eyes rather than respond, while Alicia quietly continued serving refreshments with the same calm professionalism she always displayed. She neither defended herself nor allowed bitterness to reach her expression. Her quiet dignity unsettled more people than any argument ever could. As sunset painted the Romano estate in warm shades of amber, Dominic walked alone through the East Garden, hoping to clear his thoughts before another evening of obligations. Near the greenhouse, he unexpectedly saw Alicia carefully collecting fallen roses that a storm earlier in the week had knocked from their stems. Instead of throwing them away, she arranged the undamaged blossoms into small bouquets before carrying them toward the staff residence. Curious, Dominic followed from a respectful distance until he saw her placing one bouquet inside the room of an elderly housekeeper recovering from recent surgery. The older woman smiled with grateful tears while Alicia gently adjusted the flowers beside her bedside lamp before quietly wishing her a peaceful evening. Dominic remained outside the partially open doorway, unseen by either woman. He realized that not once since the engagement celebration had Alicia allowed another person's cruelty to become an excuse for withholding kindness from the world. That realization settled heavily upon him. As he turned and walked back toward the mansion beneath the fading evening light, he understood that what he had witnessed in the ballroom had not revealed the character of the young maid nearly as much as it had revealed the character of everyone else who had stood there in silence, including himself. One quiet afternoon, as a gentle rain tapped against the tall windows of the Romano estate, Dominic Romano found himself walking through the East Wing with no particular destination in mind. His meetings had ended earlier than expected, yet his thoughts remained unusually restless. For days he had tried to dismiss the image of Alicia Brooks calmly gathering the strands of her own hair from the ballroom floor, but the memory refused to fade. It lingered beside every business decision and every conversation, silently asking a question he had never taken the time to answer. As he passed the small staff corridor, he noticed the housekeeping office standing open while several employees delivered fresh linens upstairs. A light breeze drifted through the hallway, causing the door of Alicia's locker to move slightly before slowly swinging open. Dominic had no intention of invading her privacy, but as he stepped forward to close the locker, his attention settled on the small brown paper envelope resting neatly beside a worn family photograph and a folded greeting card decorated with colorful drawings made by children. Curious only because he recognized the envelope from the night of the engagement celebration, he gently lifted the card lying beside it. Inside, written in careful handwriting and surrounded by bright crayon hearts, were simple words that immediately stopped him. Dear Miss Alicia, thank you for growing your beautiful hair so children like me can feel brave again. We cannot wait to meet you next month. Love, Emma and all your friends at Hope Children's Cancer Center. Dominic remained perfectly still. Beneath the card rested a printed appointment confirmation from the cancer center showing that Alicia had scheduled her hair donation for the following Saturday, only a week after the engagement celebration. For years of patient growth had been leading to that single appointment. For years of quietly caring for children she had never even met. His eyes slowly drifted toward the brown envelope, and although he never opened it, he understood exactly what it contained. Those carefully preserved curls were never simply part of her appearance. They represented years of sacrifice, patience, and hope that had disappeared in only a few heartbreaking seconds. At that moment, footsteps approached from the hallway. Dominic quietly placed everything back exactly as he had found it before gently closing the locker door. Alicia entered carrying folded towels, immediately surprised to see him standing there. She offered the same respectful smile she always carried. "Good afternoon, Mr. Romano." Dominic looked at her for a long moment before speaking with unusual softness. "I did not realize you had plans for your hair." Alicia instinctively touched the edge of her neatly wrapped headscarf before lowering her hand. There was no resentment in her expression, only quiet acceptance. "It was never really about my hair," she replied. "There are children who spend months looking into mirrors that remind them of their illness. I hoped maybe one little girl would smile again when she saw herself wearing a wig made with love." She spoke those words without seeking sympathy or praise. To her, they were simply the truth. Dominic felt the weight of every silent moment from the ballroom pressing against his conscience. For the first time in many years, the powerful businessman who had negotiated impossible deals and commanded unquestioned loyalty found himself unable to answer. Alicia simply excused herself with quiet courtesy and continued delivering clean towels to the guest rooms, leaving Dominic standing alone in the hallway. As he watched her disappear around the corner, he finally understood that the greatest loss that evening had never been a hairstyle. It had been the destruction of a gift that had been intended for children who had already endured more hardship than most adults would ever know. And that realization changed something inside him that could never return to what it had once been. The following evening, the Romano estate stood unusually quiet beneath a sky filled with slow-moving gray clouds. A cool breeze carried the scent of fresh rain through the gardens as Alicia Brooks finished watering the last row of white roses before returning the hose to its place beside the greenhouse. Gardening had never been part of her regular responsibilities, but she often volunteered to care for the flowers after long days because she believed living things deserved gentle attention, especially after difficult weather. As she carefully brushed damp soil from her hands, she heard measured footsteps approaching along the stone pathway. When she turned, she saw Dominic Romano walking toward her without his usual security detail or business associates. He wore a simple dark coat instead of an expensive tailored suit, making him appear less like the powerful man known throughout New York and more like someone carrying the weight of unfinished words. Alicia immediately offered a respectful smile. "Good evening, Mr. Romano." Dominic stopped a few feet away, looking toward the rows of blooming roses before finally speaking. "These flowers survived last week's storm." Alicia glanced at them with quiet appreciation. "Yes, some branches broke, but their roots stayed strong." For several seconds, neither of them spoke again. The silence felt different from the silence that had filled the ballroom days earlier. That silence had been heavy with shock. This one carried reflection. Dominic slowly looked at Alicia. "I owe you an apology." She seemed surprised but remained calm. He continued before she could answer. "Not because I caused what happened with my own hands, but because I watched it happen and failed to protect the dignity of someone who deserved far better." The words came slowly, each one carrying genuine regret rather than obligation. Throughout his life, people had apologized to him. Very rarely had he apologized to anyone else. Alicia lowered her eyes briefly before looking back at him with the same steady kindness that had quietly transformed the atmosphere of the estate over the past week. "Sometimes people do not know the weight of a moment until it has already passed," she answered softly. Dominic nodded. "That does not excuse my silence." Alicia considered his words before replying. "No, but recognizing it is where change begins." Her answer contained neither accusation nor self-righteousness. She spoke with the gentle honesty of someone who had already chosen forgiveness long before anyone asked for it. Dominic noticed that she still wore the neatly folded headscarf, though a few short curls had begun to appear around its edges. For the first time, he understood that healing was not measured by how quickly something grew back, but by whether a wounded heart allowed kindness to remain. He reached into the pocket of his coat and carefully handed her a small envelope. "This is not payment," he said quietly. "It is a donation to Hope Children's Cancer Center made in your name. It cannot replace what was lost, but perhaps it can still help some of the children you wanted to encourage." Alicia accepted the envelope with both hands, her eyes widening as she realized what it represented. A gentle smile slowly appeared across her face, not because of the amount inside, but because someone had finally understood the purpose behind the dream she had carried for 4 years. "Thank you," she whispered. Dominic looked across the peaceful garden where the evening breeze gently moved the roses that had survived the storm. In that quiet moment, he realized true leadership was never proven by how many people obeyed a person's authority. It was revealed by how willingly that person accepted responsibility when they had failed to protect another human being. As the last light of day disappeared beyond the estate, neither of them said another word. They simply stood together in respectful silence, knowing that while the past could never be rewritten, the future had already begun to change. The change inside the Romano estate did not happen all at once. It unfolded quietly, almost invisibly, like the first light of dawn slowly replacing the darkness. Employees who had once lowered their voices whenever Vanessa Sinclair entered the room now found themselves standing a little straighter whenever Alicia Brooks passed through the hallways. Her kindness had never changed, but now people noticed it with fresh eyes. Even those who had remained silent during the engagement celebration carried a quiet sense of regret, determined not to make the same mistake twice. Vanessa, however, noticed something entirely different. The admiration she had always expected from those around her seemed weaker than before. Conversations became shorter when she approached. Smiles appeared less sincere. She could not understand why the atmosphere inside the estate had shifted so dramatically, and she blamed only one person. Late one afternoon, she entered the main dining room where preparations were underway for an upcoming charity reception that would welcome business leaders, community organizers, and several children's foundations. Alicia stood near the long mahogany table, carefully arranging fresh white lilies into crystal vases. Every flower was placed with patient precision, transforming the room into a place of quiet elegance. Vanessa stopped several feet away and crossed her arms. "I thought I made myself clear," she said coldly. "You should be working where guests cannot see you." The room instantly fell silent. Several employees exchanged nervous glances, remembering how similar words had led to humiliation only days earlier. Alicia slowly turned toward Vanessa with calm respect. "I was assigned to prepare the dining room by the estate manager, Miss Sinclair." There was no challenge in her voice, only simple honesty. Vanessa stepped closer, clearly expecting the familiar fear that had once surrounded her presence. Instead, she found only quiet confidence. Before she could continue, another voice interrupted from the doorway. "The assignment came from me." The estate manager, Charles Whitmore, entered carrying a clipboard beneath his arm. He had worked for the Romano family for more than 30 years and rarely involved himself in personal disagreements. This time was different. "Miss Brooks has consistently demonstrated the highest standard of professionalism," he continued respectfully. "She is exactly where she should be." Vanessa looked stunned that someone had contradicted her so openly. Before she could respond, the executive chef emerged from the kitchen. "If I may add, Miss Brooks also coordinated tomorrow's volunteer meal deliveries for the children's shelter after finishing her regular duties." A senior housekeeper quietly nodded in agreement. "She stayed 3 extra hours yesterday helping one of our newer employees learn the responsibilities of the position." Then the head gardener spoke from the open terrace doors. "And she spent her own lunch break helping us restore the memorial garden after the storm." One by one, employees who had once remained silent now found the courage to speak. None of them raised their voices. None of them acted with disrespect. They simply shared the truth about the woman standing quietly beside the flowers. Alicia herself seemed almost embarrassed by the attention. She gently lowered her eyes, wishing the conversation would end because she had never sought recognition for any act of kindness. Standing alone in the center of the dining room, Vanessa suddenly realized something that wealth and social status could not guarantee. Authority might command obedience for a season, but genuine character earned loyalty that no amount of influence could ever purchase. At that very moment, Dominic Romano entered through the grand doorway. He looked across the silent room, taking in every expression without anyone needing to explain what had just happened. His eyes rested briefly on Alicia before moving toward Vanessa. He said nothing, yet the quiet disappointment visible in his face spoke louder than any public criticism ever could. For the first time since their engagement, Vanessa felt something she had never expected to experience inside the Romano estate. She was no longer the person who held the deepest respect in the room. 2 evenings later, the Romano estate welcomed another gathering of distinguished guests, but unlike the lavish engagement celebration, this event carried a different purpose. Leaders from children's charities, hospital foundations, and community organizations filled the grand ballroom to raise support for families facing serious illness. Elegant music floated beneath the crystal chandeliers while conversations centered not on prestige, but on generosity. Alicia Brooks quietly moved among the guests with the same grace she had always displayed, her neatly wrapped headscarf complementing the simple black uniform she wore with quiet pride. She had no desire to stand out. She simply wanted the evening to succeed for the children whose futures depended upon the kindness of strangers. Dominic Romano stood near the center of the ballroom, greeting donors with calm professionalism, yet his attention frequently drifted toward the employees who made the event possible. He noticed Alicia encouraging a nervous young volunteer who had accidentally dropped a stack of printed programs. Rather than allowing embarrassment to linger, Alicia knelt beside the volunteer, helped gather every page, and offered a reassuring smile that immediately replaced panic with confidence. Several nearby guests witnessed the small exchange and smiled warmly, touched by a kindness that required no audience. Vanessa Sinclair noticed those smiles as well, and frustration quietly settled across her face. Throughout the evening, she found herself increasingly overlooked as conversations naturally shifted toward the charitable mission of the event. Hoping to reclaim attention, she approached a group of prominent donors and remarked that household employees often received far more praise than they deserved. Her words drifted farther than she intended. The surrounding conversations gradually faded as several guests exchanged uncomfortable glances. One elderly woman representing a children's cancer foundation stepped forward with quiet dignity. She looked toward Alicia before turning back to Vanessa. "Young lady," she said gently, "the woman serving refreshments today was scheduled to visit our center with a hair donation for our children. We learned what happened before she could arrive. Even after losing something she spent years preparing, she still sent encouragement instead of excuses." Another foundation director nodded. "The donation made in her name helped us provide new wigs for children waiting on our list." Her kindness reached them even after her own disappointment. Around the ballroom, more guests began looking toward Alicia with admiration rather than pity. She lowered her eyes modestly, clearly uncomfortable becoming the center of attention. Dominic quietly stepped forward until he stood beside the elderly foundation representative. He allowed the silence to settle before speaking with calm conviction that carried effortlessly across the ballroom. "Every organization represented here exists for one reason," he said. "To remind people that compassion matters more than appearance, status, or influence. I have spent much of my life evaluating strength through power. Recently, someone inside this estate reminded me that true strength is measured by the dignity we protect in others." He turned toward Vanessa, not with anger, but with unmistakable disappointment. A future family cannot be built where another person's humanity is treated as something disposable. The room became completely silent. No raised voices. No dramatic confrontation. Only the quiet weight of truth resting upon every person present. Dominic slowly removed the engagement ring from his hand and placed it gently upon the nearby table. "Our engagement ends tonight," he said calmly. "Not because of one mistake, but because character is revealed by the choices we make when someone weaker stands before us." No one applauded. No one celebrated. The silence itself carried greater power than any reaction could have expressed. Alicia remained standing beside the refreshment table, stunned by what had unfolded, while Vanessa quietly realized that respect once lost through cruelty could never be restored through wealth or reputation alone. Beneath the warm glow of the chandeliers, surrounded by people who had dedicated their lives to serving others, the grand ballroom finally witnessed what genuine leadership looked like, and for the first time since that unforgettable evening, dignity stood taller than pride. Several months passed, and with each changing season the Romano estate seemed to breathe differently. The grand halls remained as elegant as ever. The marble floors still reflected the morning sunlight, and the gardens continued blooming beneath careful hands. Yet something invisible had changed within the people who called the estate home. Employees greeted one another with greater warmth. Managers listened more carefully before making decisions, and acts of kindness that once passed unnoticed now became part of the culture Dominic Romano quietly encouraged. Respect had become more than an expectation. It had become an example. Alicia Brooks continued working with the same humility that had always defined her. Her hair had begun to grow back, soft curls slowly returning beneath the morning sunshine. But she never measured healing by her reflection. Instead, she measured it by the smiles she saw each weekend while volunteering at Hope Children's Cancer Center. The donation established in her name had grown far beyond a single contribution. Families from across New York received handcrafted wigs, counseling services, and emotional support through a program that now carried a simple message printed above every welcome desk. Every child deserves to feel seen. Alicia never asked who had expanded the program year after year. She simply continued reading stories to young patients, helping parents during difficult afternoons, and reminding frightened children that courage often looked very ordinary. One bright Saturday morning, she watched a little girl place a new wig upon her head before running toward a mirror with joyful laughter. The child spun in a small circle before hugging her mother with tears of happiness. Alicia quietly smiled, her own eyes filling with emotion, knowing that hope had finally reached the children she had wanted to serve all along. Outside the hospital, across the street beneath the shade of an old maple tree, a familiar black sedan waited without attracting attention. Dominic sat quietly inside, watching through the window as children entered the building carrying balloons, stuffed animals, and fresh dreams. His driver remained silent, understanding that his employer had not come to be recognized. He had come only to witness the lives forever changed by one woman's compassion. On the seat beside him rested the annual report from the foundation. The newest wing of the program had recently opened, providing wigs and emotional support to hundreds of additional children every year. The project carried no reference to his name. At Dominic's request, every plaque displayed only a single dedication, inspired by an act of quiet kindness. He folded the report, looked once more toward the entrance, and saw Alicia laughing gently with several children as they planted flowers in a small memorial garden outside the center. She never noticed the sedan. She never knew he had been there. She did not need to. Some of the greatest acts of gratitude were never spoken aloud. As the afternoon sun stretched long shadows across the sidewalk, Dominic asked his driver to leave without announcing his visit. The car disappeared into the steady rhythm of the city while laughter continued echoing through the hospital garden behind it. Alicia looked toward the blooming flowers, gently brushing one newly formed curl away from her face before helping another child water the roses. In that peaceful moment, nothing remained of humiliation except the lesson it had left behind. Wealth had not restored dignity. Power had not restored dignity. Revenge had not restored dignity. Compassion had. And on that quiet afternoon, without applause, without headlines, and without anyone asking for recognition, the world remembered what dignity truly looks like.